Deep inside a forest in Ibarapa North, Oyo State, there was a reactor pot. Not a cooking pot. A reactor, the kind of industrial equipment you find in a pharmaceutical manufacturing plant. Beside it, mounted distillation units, fabricated condensers, drums carrying 1,800 liters of controlled chemical precursors, and, operating it all, a 56-year-old Mexican national flown in specifically for his expertise in large-scale methamphetamine synthesis. This was not a street corner drug den. This was a factory, hidden in the forest, and the question nobody in the Nigerian media is asking, the question that should be keeping policymakers up at night, is not how NDLEA found it. The real question is, who brought a Mexican cartel chemist through Nigerian immigration, and how long was he operating before we knew? Stay with me, because by the end of this video, what happened in that Oyo forest will tell you something very specific about where organized crime in Nigeria is heading and what the state is and isn't doing about it. Before we go any further, if you are new to this channel, welcome. Naija Insight Desk exists for one reason: to give you the kind of analysis that goes beyond the headlines and the noise. Subscribe now, because this conversation is about to get deeper. Let us establish exactly what happened, when it happened, and why it matters that it is happening now. On the 17th of June 2026, tactical operatives of the National Drug Law Enforcement Agency, the NDLEA, raided a fortified industrial-scale clandestine methamphetamine laboratory operating deep within the forest of Tapa Village, Ibarapa North local government area, Oyo State. The following day, June 18th, a specialized forensic team from the NDLEA's Directorate of Forensic and Chemical Monitoring moved in to conduct a rigorous examination of the facility. What they found was not a makeshift lab. It was a fully operational meth production line, complete with a reactor pot for chemical synthesis, 2 mounted distillation units, 3 fabricated mixers and condensers, and 2 vegetable dehydrator machines used to rapidly dry the crystallized product for distribution. 5 people were arrested on site. Among them, Jose Villa Ochoa, a 56-year-old Mexican national described by NDLEA as a methamphetamine expert, brought in specifically to provide the technical expertise for large-scale meth synthesis. The 4 Nigerian collaborators arrested alongside him were Maxwell Uche Neville, 30, Olatunji Yusuf, 37, Bankole Akim Owolabi, 45, and Ganiu Monsu, 43, all described as providing logistical support, local cover, and operational continuity for the cartel. The NDLEA chairman, retired Brigadier General Mohammed Buba Marwa, made the announcement at a press briefing in Abuja on June 25th, 8 days after the raid. That 8-day gap between operation and public announcement tells us the agency was careful. Forensic documentation first, prosecution preparation second, public statement third. That is not routine NDLEA communication strategy. That is a signal the agency considers this case prosecutorially significant. I'll come back to the Ibarapa geography in a few minutes, because where this lab was built is not random. It tells us something very deliberate about how transnational cartels are choosing their Nigerian footprint. Now, this is not the first time this year. Barely 4 weeks before the Oyo bust, NDLEA dismantled another large-scale methamphetamine laboratory hidden in a forest in Ijebu East, Ogun State. 2 forest meth labs, 2 states, 4 weeks apart, both in the South-West. That is not a coincidence. That is a pattern, and patterns require analysis, not just press conferences. Now, NDLEA has been in the news consistently over the past year: busts, seizures, press conferences. But I want to ask a harder question. Is the institution keeping pace with the threat, or are we celebrating tactical wins while losing the strategic war? Let's break that down. The NDLEA was established by Decree 48 of 1989 and has undergone significant reforms since Brigadier General Mohammed Buba Marwa was appointed chairman in January 2021. Under MAWA, the agency has recorded a measurably sharper operational posture, bigger seizures, higher profile arrests, greater international cooperation. The Oyo bust is consistent with that trajectory. But let us examine which institutions intersect with this case and where the accountability gaps are. First, the NDLEA itself. The agency's Directorate of Forensic and Chemical Monitoring conducted the site examination within 24 hours of the raid. That forensic speed matters enormously for prosecution integrity. The chemical evidence chain, P2P, phenylacetic acid, sulfuric acid, tartaric acid, caustic soda, must be documented with pharmaceutical precision if the prosecution is to hold. The question is whether Nigerian courts have the technical capacity to process and adjudicate forensic drug evidence of this complexity. That is not a critique of the NDLEA, that is a question about the system the NDLEA feeds its evidence into. Second, the Nigerian Immigration Service. A 56-year-old Mexican national did not appear in a forest in Ibarapa North from thin air. He entered Nigeria. He obtained a visa or was facilitated through a port of entry. He was housed somewhere before he reached that forest. The question of how a foreign cartel specialist was inserted into the country and whether that insertion was noticed, flagged, or simply ignored sits directly with immigration and the National Intelligence Agency. NDLEA caught him. The pre-arrival intelligence failure belongs to other agencies. Here is the fact that should stop you mid-scroll if you see this story online. The chemicals recovered at this site were not just enough for a few batches of street product. Preliminary assessments suggest this facility was capable of producing millions of doses of methamphetamine for both domestic distribution and international export. We are not talking about a Nigerian drug problem, we are talking about a Nigerian drug production problem for global supply. Fourth, the Oyo State government. Tapa Village, Ibarapa North, falls within a geopolitical zone that has experienced recurring security challenges over recent years, including farmers-herders tensions and banditry concerns. The question of whether state-level security structures, the SDS, the Oyo State Security Network, the Amotekun Corps, had any intelligence about unusual activity in the Tapa Forest area is one that the state government must answer publicly. Now, I want to take you beyond the bust itself, because who gains and who loses from this announcement at this particular moment tells us something important about how drug enforcement intersects with politics in Nigeria. Pay attention to this section. The NDLEA's timing. The press briefing was held on June 25th, 8 days after the operation. That deliberate lag, combined with a chairman-level announcement, even if delivered through a spokesperson, signals that this bust was intended to land as a major institutional statement. The NDLEA under MAWA has consistently used high-profile press conferences not merely to inform the public, but to reinforce the agency's budget and political relevance to the National Assembly. In a year when federal budget allocations are under pressure, a headline-grabbing transnational cartel bust with an arrested foreign specialist is valuable political currency. That is not a cynical observation, it is an accurate one. Agencies that secure their operational budgets through demonstrated results serve the public interest better than agencies that do not. The question is whether the political visibility of the NDLEA's wins is matched by the institutional depth of the system those wins require to translate into lasting outcomes. Who gains from this story? MAWA's NDLEA gains credibility and leverage for greater interagency cooperation requests. The federal government gains a narrative counterpoint to security criticism, a story of institutions working, intelligence maturing, and the state asserting sovereignty even into forested criminal hideouts. Who faces harder questions? The Nigeria Immigration Service, the Customs Service, and the National Intelligence Agency face uncomfortable questions about pre-arrival intelligence gaps. If the same political scrutiny applied to the NDLEA's operational successes were applied to the institutional failures that allowed this lab to be built and staffed in the first place, the picture becomes more complex. Let me give you a specific comparison that reframes this entire story. In Mexico, the Sinaloa cartel has for 2 decades operated what analysts call a chemist export model, recruiting and deploying meth synthesis experts to countries where precursor regulations are weaker and enforcement is patchier. The DEA has documented this model across Central America, Southeast Asia, and West Africa. What happened in Oyo is not an isolated Nigerian story. It is a chapter in a global cartel playbook, and Nigeria just became a named location in that playbook. The 2027 dimension. Drug enforcement in Nigeria has historically had a political underside. The EFCC has been weaponized. The DSS has been deployed for political purposes. The question is whether NDLEA's intensified operations, particularly in the Southwest, a politically contested zone ahead of 2027, reflect purely operational prioritization or whether there are political calculations embedded in the geographic focus of recent busts. This is not a claim, it is a question that serious observers must hold. The evidence does not currently support a partisan interpretation, but it is the kind of question that warrants ongoing scrutiny. The silence that speaks. As of the time of this video, the international dimension of this arrest, specifically the question of cartel networks with Mexican coordinates, has received almost no attention from Nigeria's foreign affairs establishment. No statement from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs on the diplomatic implications of a foreign national being arrested as an active member of a transnational drug cartel on Nigerian soil. That silence is telling. Either the ministry does not consider this significant enough to address publicly, or it is being managed through diplomatic back channels. Either way, the absence of an official foreign affairs response to what is effectively a transnational criminal sovereignty violation is a gap worth noting. Now, if what you just heard challenges what you thought you knew, drop it in the comments. I want to hear your read on this before we get to the part that reframes everything. Now, I promised to come back to where this lab was built, and here is why it matters. Ibarapa North is in the western corridor of Oyo State, an agricultural zone historically associated with large-scale farming, cassava, yam, vegetables, and with the Fulani herders-farmers conflict that convulsed the region between 2019 and 2022. The population displacement, the insecurity, the reduced state presence, the large tracts of forest, these conditions did not go unnoticed by actors looking for manufacturing space that was simultaneously accessible by road for supply chains and invisible from aerial or human surveillance. Cartels do not choose locations randomly. They do due diligence. The same security vacuum that made Ibarapa a difficult zone for Oyo State farmers made it an attractive zone for transnational drug manufacturing. There is a specific precursor chemical recovered at this site that connects this Oyo operation to a global supply chain, and I will get to it in the final section because it changes how you should think about Nigeria's role in the international synthetic drug trade. The synthetic drug shift. This bust, coming 4 weeks after the Ogun lab dismantlement, signals a structural shift in how cartels are engaging with Nigeria. For decades, Nigeria's role in the global drug trade was primarily a transit country, heroin from Asia, cocaine from South America, moving through Nigerian networks towards Europe and the United States. What the Oyo and Ogun busts suggest is that elements of the transnational trade are now pursuing Nigeria as a production country, leveraging cheap precursor access, relatively, available forest cover, and the perception of institutional gaps. That is a categorically different threat. A transit country can disrupt drug flows through port and border interdiction. A production country faces a deeper challenge. The infrastructure, the expertise, and the economic incentives for manufacturing are now embedded domestically. Economic consequences. The NDLEA described this as a multi-billion naira cache. That figure refers to the street value of the methamphetamine that could have been produced. For the communities surrounding Tapa Village and more broadly for Nigeria's young population, the harm calculus extends far beyond street value. Synthetic drugs, particularly methamphetamine, have historically devastated communities with far higher addiction rates and far lower recovery prospects than organic drugs. The institutional cost of treating a synthetic drug epidemic, the healthcare burden, the criminal justice load, the productivity loss is not captured in seizure value headlines.
For Nigerians at the economic margins, this is the question I want the commentary class to sit with. The 4 Nigerian collaborators arrested, Maxwell Nevo, Olatunji Yusuf, Bankole Owolabi, and Ganiu Monsiu, range from age 30 to 45. These are not wealthy kingpins, they are logistics and cover operatives. They are men, likely from the economic edges of their communities, who were recruited into a transnational criminal structure because the formal economy offered them nothing. That is not an excuse, it is a structural observation, and it demands that the policy response to Nigeria's drug production problem includes not just enforcement, but economic opportunity. The arrest of Jose Villa Ochoa is not just a Nigerian law enforcement story, it's a data point in a pattern that West African security analysts have been tracking with growing concern. The United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, the UNODC, has documented the increasing interest of Mexican and Colombian cartels in West Africa as a manufacturing and transit base since the mid-2010s. What was once primarily a transit cocaine corridor has begun to show signs of synthetic drug production infrastructure. Nigeria, Ghana, and Côte d'Ivoire have seen the largest volume of synthetic drug incidents in the sub-region over the past 3 years. ECOWAS has a regional action plan on drug trafficking, but its operational capacity to coordinate cross-border enforcement remains limited by the same fiscal and political constraints that hamper most of the community's security frameworks. The Oyo bust is precisely the kind of case that should trigger an ECOWAS-level intelligence sharing protocol between Nigeria, Benin Republic, and Ghana, the 3 countries through which precursor chemicals most likely transited to reach an Oyo forest. From an U.S. foreign policy perspective, this arrest has implications. The U.S. Drug Administration has formal cooperation agreements with the NDLEA. A Mexican national with cartel connections being arrested in Nigeria is the kind of case the DEA monitors closely, not just for what it tells them about Nigerian drug markets, but for what it tells them about the expansion of Sinaloa-linked or CJNG-linked networks into West Africa. Whether the Nigerian government has already activated that cooperation channel or whether it is allowing this to remain a purely domestic prosecution will shape how much intelligence value the international community extracts from this arrest. For the Nigerian diaspora, particularly those in the United States, the United Kingdom, and Canada, this story lands differently. It is not a source of shame, it is a test of institutional seriousness. The question diaspora communities should be asking their networks back home: does this prosecution proceed to full conviction and sentencing with the Mexican national extradited or tried in Nigeria, or does the case collapse in court the way too many high-profile drug prosecutions in Nigeria have in the past?
Now, I want to steelman the strongest argument on the other side, because fair analysis demands it, and then tell you why, in this case, it is not enough. The strongest counter-argument. NDLEA is doing exactly what it is supposed to do. The Oyo bust demonstrates intelligence maturity, forensic capability, and operational precision. The agency has dismantled 2 major meth labs in 4 weeks. The system is working. The right response is to resource and trust the institution, not to catastrophize around its limits. That is a legitimate argument, and it is partly correct. The NDLEA's operational evolution under Marwa is real and measurable. The agency deserves recognition for what it has achieved. But here is where the argument falls short. Tactical success is not the same as strategic containment. The speed with which cartels rebuilt after each Nigerian drug enforcement operation over the past decade suggests that the deterrent effect of even major busts is limited without parallel action on precursor supply chains, on immigration intelligence, on financial crime, because a multi-billion naira meth operation does not run on cash under a mattress. It runs on financial infrastructure that EFCC and the Central Bank of Nigeria have jurisdiction over. The most common misconception circulating on social media. This story has generated 2 dominant social media frames. The first, this is Tinubu's government finally getting serious about security. The second, this is the government planting a story to distract from the economy. Both frames are intellectually lazy. Drug enforcement operations are planned over months. The June 17th raid was the product of extended surveillance, intelligence gathering, and interagency coordination, not a political instruction issued from Aso Rock. The politicization of law enforcement outcomes in either direction undermines the institutional trust that effective enforcement requires. The nuance being lost in the noise. Jose Villa Ochoa is a suspect, not yet a convict. The quality of the NDLEA's forensic evidence documentation, the capacity of the Nigerian judicial system to handle a technically complex drug manufacturing prosecution, and the diplomatic dimension of trying a foreign national, all of these will determine whether this landmark arrest becomes a landmark conviction. Right now, we have a landmark arrest. The work is not done. I told you I would come back to a specific precursor chemical. Let me do that now. Among the substances recovered at the Oyo site was phenyl 2-propanone, P2P. This chemical is internationally controlled under Schedule 1 of the 1988 UN Drug Convention, precisely because it is the primary precursor for the P2P synthesis route of methamphetamine, the same route historically used by Mexican cartels, distinct from the ephedrine-based method associated with Southeast Asian production. The presence of P2P in an Oyo Forest meth lab is not just a Nigerian chemistry fact, it is a cartel signature. It tells investigators and should tell policymakers which criminal network's methodology was being deployed in that Oyo forest. 3 most likely next moves from key actors. 1. The NDLEA will intensify aerial and ground surveillance of forest areas in the southwest, particularly in Ogun and Osun states, which share the forest belt geography with Ibarapa North. Expect at least one more major forest operation before the end of 2026. 2. The surviving cartel network, and there is one because Jose Villa Ochoa was brought into a structure that already existed before he arrived, will attempt relocation, possibly to less monitored northern or middle belt forest zones. The operational model will not be abandoned, it will be adapted. 3. The Nigerian government will face increasing pressure from international partners, particularly the US State Department, which publishes an annual International Narcotics Control Strategy report that ranks Nigeria's counter-narcotics performance, to demonstrate that the Oyo bust was the beginning of a sustained structural response, not a one-time operational highlight. Signals to watch in the coming weeks. Watch whether the Ministry of Foreign Affairs issues any statement on the diplomatic dimensions of this arrest. Silence beyond 2 weeks is itself a signal of either diplomatic back-channel management or institutional indifference. Watch the EFCC open a financial investigation parallel to the NDLEA prosecution. A multi-billion naira meth manufacturing operation has financial infrastructure. If no financial investigation materializes, it means either the money trail has already gone cold or the state is not pursuing the full scope of the network. Watch the prosecution timeline. Nigerian courts have historically struggled with technical drug cases. The speed at which the state moves Jose Villa Ochoa through the judicial system will signal whether this prosecution is being treated with the seriousness the charge demands. The 12-month and 3-year picture. In 12 months, if the structural gaps, immigration intelligence, precursor import controls, forest zone surveillance, remain unaddressed, the probability of a third major meth lab in the southwest approaches near certainty. The cartel model is resilient. Individual arrests disrupt nodes, they do not dismantle networks. In 3 years, if Nigeria continues to be operationally attractive to transnational synthetic drug producers, the country risks being formally classified not merely as a drug transit state, which carries its own diplomatic and economic consequences, but as a drug manufacturing state. That classification, if it appears in US State Department and UNODC reports, would affect foreign direct investment perception, insurance costs, and the broader Nigeria brand at exactly the moment the country is trying to rebuild economic credibility. Here's what I want you to take from this section. The NDLEA found the lab, but the lab existed because multiple other systems failed first. Immigration, customs, financial monitoring. Applauding the firefighters is correct. Asking why the building was allowed to catch fire is more important. I opened this video with a question.
A Mexican cartel chemist was operating an industrial meth factory in a Nigerian forest, and the question no one was asking was how he got there. Here is the unflinching answer. He got there because Nigeria's institutional architecture has a front door that is monitored and a series of side doors that are not. The NDLEA monitors the criminal drug trade with increasing sophistication, but the immigration service, the customs system, and the financial intelligence apparatus do not yet operate with equivalent integration. The result is that transnational criminal networks can exploit the gaps between institutions even when each institution on its own terms is improving. That is the structural reality this bust reveals. Not failure, but incomplete integration. And incomplete integration in the face of increasingly sophisticated transnational criminal investment is a gap that will be exploited again. The measured conclusion is this. The Oyo forest bust is a genuine institutional achievement. It should be recognized as such, and it should be used by the National Assembly, by the executive, by civil society, not as a closing statement, but as an opening brief for a deeper cross-agency conversation about Nigeria's synthetic drug exposure. I want to hear your analysis. Do you think the prosecution holds? Do you think the financial network gets investigated? Do you think ECOWAS is equipped to respond to what this bust reveals about West Africa's synthetic drug landscape? Push back on anything I've said. Correct me where I'm wrong, extend the analysis where I've left ground unexplored. One thread I have deliberately left open. The 4 Nigerian collaborators arrested in that forest. Their stories, who recruited them, what they were paid, what their communities look like, is the human geography of this crisis that press conferences will never tell you. That is a video for another day. If this analysis gave you clarity, not agreement, clarity, share it with one person who needs to understand what is actually happening. Like, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.